Yeah, that's a great question. I think, the context for your viewers is that students in Mississippi have very different standards than students in Massachusetts. So the tests in Mississippi are far easier compared to our MCAS, and the standards are far lower, and yet we're one country where students are competing for jobs not only in this country but around the world. So it's amazing to watch how the federal government has been incredibly active under both Republican and Democratic administrations in dealing with standards. People that I know and respect say there won't be a real difference between the common standards and the standards and frameworks that we've had in Massachusetts. What's interesting is why state governments really have decisions to make. If you want that federal money, you have to adhere to the common standards. And at a time when there's not a lot of money, it's really interesting to watch the federal government say, here, we've got money, but you've got to comply. So I am optimistic from people I've talked to that there won't be a great difference. The challenge will be at the local and state levels, how much work has to be done to comply with these new standards. Hopefully not a lot. I don't think there'll be huge differences from people that I know. I haven't a lot of time to look at it personally. I'm relying on people who know well, who I trust. So I'm optimistic there won't be huge difference in the standards, because certainly that's something that Massachusetts is proud of.
Well, I mean, is it too early to know, or is there a way, from what you understand, with the shift in the basis for the standards, if nothing else, do you feel that Newton will be in a position to still excel to the level that parents expect, that educators would like to provide, and that has historically been what we are famous for, which are excellent schools?
Yeah, I'm confident about that. I think regardless of whether it's the current standards we have or the new standards, I think the Newton community aims to go above those standards, and I think that will happen regardless of what those standards are. But I think what standards do is, schools are more consistent than they used to be, and that's generally a good thing as long as there's some flexibility. So overall, I'm hopeful that it won't be a major change.
Okay. What were your feelings on the MCAS just in general?
That's a good question. I will, I think there's a role for testing.
Standardized testing.
Standardized testing, especially when it can give teachers the information they need to improve student learning. And I think tests have gotten better, but we have to have tests within context, because tests measure certain things. But when I look at the successful people that I know, Charlie, it wasn't just because they were good test takers. So I think we have to keep it in balance. I was visiting schools in China last year, and a couple of people said to me, it's so interesting that we're trying to be more like you and focus on creativity and problem solving, and yet you're trying to be like us and focus on testing. I just saw a study that just came out, it was in Newsweek last week, which said that American students are falling behind on creativity. So I think it's about balance. Standards and content are important as long as our students still have an opportunity to pursue creativity. And I think both can be done, but I think balance is the key. And I think places like Newton, which aren't just fixated on test scores, still give students that opportunity to do both.
Well, it almost sounds like you're putting standardized testing in a category of teacher empowerment rather than individual student results.
Yes, and I think there's a role certainly for student results, because I think the data systems that we'll have soon can track students after a long period to find out, for example, what interventions work best for students. That's incredibly important, and we can have data to help figure that out, because at a time of limited resources, it's especially important that the interventions that we use in schools really pay off. And it can't be a guessing game. We need to use internal data that we get to figure that out, and certainly, or external data like the MCAS. So I think MCAS has a role. We have to keep it in perspective. I think there are schools around this country that focus probably too much on testing. Fortunately,
are we one of them?
I would say no, from everything I know. Again, I haven't been in classrooms. That's what I'm excited for in September. But from talking to people, I sense there's a healthy balance.
Okay. So there was a survey recently of 1,000 parents of elementary students, or with children about to enter elementary school. And out of the 1,000, 70% of the parents indicated that they want full-day kindergarten for more learning time. Just learning time is very important. What's your feeling about that? Because my understanding is that right now we have technically just enough to be able to say that we have full-time kindergarten, but it's not what most people would consider to be full-time. Where are we with that exactly? Because I've heard differing thoughts on that.
The model right now that you're referring to is students go for half the year for 3 days all day, and the other half of the year they go for 2 days. So basically it's, if you have a class of 22, 11 students remain in the afternoon with the teacher to work on literacy, math, in smaller groups. So that's the Newton model. When I was in Wellesley, we had the same model. I called it kind of the stay day model.
Were you happy with that?
Half the class. I thought it worked well. People in Wellesley, were happy with it. And then there are many school districts that have full day where the entire class stays. So that's, I think there's been a lot of research, and there was actually an article in the New York Times just yesterday about the power of strong kindergarten instruction and what a difference it can make in kids' lives, even income earning potential, strong kindergarten, not just test scores. So I look forward to visiting kindergartens in Newton to get a sense of how the current model is working. It's unique, in Newton there are not teacher aides the way there are some other districts with full-time, so I'll have to take a look at the impact of that and how does that impact what we do. But I think for me, it's looking at data to see how well students are doing as they move into first grade in literacy, in assessments, and it's also through observation.
Well, how are kids doing in the elementary schools with literacy specifically? I'm thinking, the case for strong early learning. Obviously, there are some associated costs and investments that need to be made in that.
Right.
So, where are we on early learning? I mean, there was a Harvard Graduate School of Education study, I guess. There was strategies for children. 43% of mass third graders are not reading at grade level, and apparently it's not just low-income kids in different parts. Apparently some of these kids are coming from districts like ours. So how important is that education process at that stage?
Yeah, it's very important for a couple of reasons. First, when we look at students who are referred to special education, not always, but small percentage of students, is because they don't get reading right away. And so having the best literacy instruction at the lower grades is incredibly important. Several years ago, Newton added literacy specialists at the elementary school to work with teachers to make sure their practices are the best they can be, and also support students who need help. So I look forward to, one of the reasons I spend a lot of time in schools, Charlie, is to take a look at programs, talk to principals, look at results. But I certainly appreciate the desire for parents in Newton to have the best possible education in the early years, because it's incredibly important. Kindergartens are much more academic than they were before, and I think play is certainly important, but yet we know that kids can get a lot of literacy work done in kindergarten or even preschool. So, I appreciate that survey, and I'll certainly look at that issue closely by visiting classrooms and looking at data, and listening to parents too, because I'm happy to. Surveys are certainly valuable and important.
Okay, let me just toss out a couple things that are obviously not going to be quick answers, but hopefully we can try to just at least touch on a few things.
Sure.
Differentiated learning. Math, reading, do you see Newton being where it should be, or do you see some clear room for improvement?
Okay. Without being in classrooms, and I'm going to give you a straight answer based on my experiences, but I literally have only been in 3 classrooms in Newton for 4 minutes each. So it's really impossible to make a judgment about the teaching in Newton. And I think one thing in my job, I have to be careful, but to observe carefully, because I hear a lot of stories. But I can give you some context. I think in the area of literacy, in the districts that I've worked in, we've made a lot of progress in terms of small group instruction and differentiated instruction. I would say math is the area, certainly in my previous district, where we were beginning to take a look at differentiated instruction, especially, and I'm talking about the elementary level in particular. I think that's what you're referring to.
You mean in a previous district being Chappaqua?
Yeah, in other districts, and we had new math materials, and I will tell you that math is for elementary teachers, given all the subjects that they have to teach, is an incredible challenge. But on the other hand, we know that students learn math differently. And I know as a parent of elementary school children that I certainly hear parents talk about, how can the kids be doing the same math because they come in at very different levels.